I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Well, here we are, 2 days after the election, and most but not all of the races are decided. The commercials have returned to healthcare and cars, and our world is slowly getting back to normal. But there is one question creeping into my mind, and I know it's on the minds of many of you as well. Where's all that leftover money go? That is our big story tonight. It's a question we've received at least from a dozen of you, including one just as recently as last night. Lucinda asked, hey, what happens when the money left over from the candidate's campaign after the election? A few weeks ago, Kenneth asked kind of the same thing. Could you explain what happens with a candidate's donation money if they have any left over after the election ends? Well, great questions, both of you, and tonight we're going to answer that. Now, it's no secret that these midterm elections were expensive. Actually, it's looking like it was the most expensive midterm ever. A lot of your questions came in response to our stories on campaign finances in the race for Oregon governor, where Tina Kotek is the projected winner. By the way, Christine Drazan has not conceded yet. Let's see what's left over in each candidate's bank account 2 days removed from the election. Christine Drazan has just over $157,000. That's a drop in the bucket, though, compared to what was spent over the course of the campaign, about $22 million by her campaign. Tina Kotek has nearly $900,000 left over. Her campaign spent more than $28 million to get her elected, if the projection holds. And Betsy Johnson still has over $400,000. Her campaign spent nearly $17 million in her bid as an unaffiliated candidate that fell short. So, back to the question of what can be done with that money. Well, the Oregon Secretary of State's office tells us the short answer is it can be used for pretty much any lawful purpose other than personal use. And what does personal use include? Well, that's things like paying for your groceries or a mortgage or tickets to the concert, loan payments, stuff like that. All right, let's take a look at examples of what it can be used for. It can be used to defray any expenses incurred in connection with the candidate's duties as a public office holder. It can also be contributed to another committee. It can also be given to charity. And the final bullet point in the campaign finance manual is it can be used for any other lawful purpose, which I got to tell you seems incredibly vague, don't you think? So for some clarity on exactly what that means, we asked Republican strategist who deals with the issues all the time like this. You'll probably recognize Rebecca Tweed from our coverage on election night. If I'm a candidate and I decide that I need to start getting massages or hairstyling done to help with my legislative performance, is that something I can use campaign funds for?
I will just say a lot of them need to be doing that. We could use some makeovers in the legislature. Technically they could, but it's very rare that it ever happens. I mean, I think most folks want to be really respectful of how that money was contributed. Oftentimes people will use their PAC dollars to attend conferences so that they're not using state funds or tax dollars. I mean, so there's always a little bit of discretion there.
Now, I'm not sure exactly who she was talking about needing a makeover there, but okay. And I want to clarify, by the way, we're talking about candidates for state office here. The federal rules are similar, but they're a little different, so state office. She said most candidates will either hold on to their money for their next campaign or maybe donate it to another candidate's campaign in the future. They cannot put it in their pockets. Unless, that is, they personally loaned the campaign money, then they can pay themselves back. And, by the way, they can also buy furniture for their office, and they can also hire a family member for staff with campaign money.
But yeah, they can buy furniture. I mean, again, there's some pretty strict examinations from the Secretary of State on it, to approve those expenses. Treasurers kind of know the rules, but there's a little bit of leeway, but certainly can't pay for trips to Hawaii, unfortunately.
Can they hire family members to be their legislative staff members?
They can. There are some laws against that. Over the last 15 years, there have been a few things that have tightened up sort of that nepotism, which I think is a really negative term. It has a lot of negative connotations. But for a lot of legislators, they're spending 6 months away from home. They're not going back every day unless you live in the Portland metro area. So their spouses, decide to move to Salem with them or move somewhere nearby and can work in the legislature. certainly they can use campaign funds for that.
All right, well, and some candidates will have money left over, as we've seen with the governor's race. But Rebecca Tweed says if your candidate lost, you should have spent every last dollar you had trying to find that win.
Sort of a rule from being a strategist side is you don't want to have any money left over, like unless you're for sure that you're going to win. But as we go through, some of the campaign finance on some of these competitive races, if any of the folks lost that thought they would win and they have any money left, somebody made a mistake strategically. You should get that, spend everything that it takes to win.
How about that? Now let's check in on a few races that are still too close to be called tonight. In Oregon's 6th Congressional District, Democrat Andrea Salinas holds a slight lead over Republican Mike Erickson. If you've been following this race, you know this is the one that's gotten really nasty. The attack ads were endless, and Erickson is even suing Salinas over one of those ads. It's the result we'll be watching very closely. And in Oregon's 5th Congressional District, Republican Lori Chavez DeRemer is leading Democrat Jamie McLeod Skinner. Votes are still being counted here as well. We'll be sure to let you know as soon as that race is called. And that brings us to Washington's 3rd Congressional District. That is also a closely watched race between Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and Republican Joe Kent. We're getting a look at new numbers here that have just been updated in the last hour or so, and you can tell, doing some quick math, looks like they're about 6,000 votes apart. Gluesenkamp Perez still in the lead. Evan Watson joins us now for some context on these new numbers we just saw and what he's hearing from both campaigns tonight. Evan?
Yeah, Pat, so what we've seen tonight, those numbers are from Cowlitz County and from Lewis County, two counties that favor Joe Kent in this race. We are still waiting on the big 20,000 per day vote drop from Clark County. That's yet to come. Check my watch right about now, about 6 p.m. at this time. So that should be any minute now to get that. But I talked with county election officials today to get a sense of how many votes are left. As it stands right now, there are still about 70,000 votes outstanding in this race. Both candidates are prepared to wait until early next week for decisive results. Clark County has the majority of the votes remaining in this race. County Auditor Greg Kimsey says election workers in Clark County can only process about 20,000 ballots in one day. So that means the Gluesenkamp Perez and Kent campaigns are looking at Monday night as the time when most of these remaining ballots will be in. So why is it taking this long? Well, Clark County election workers have to process and verify signatures on ballots that arrived on Election Day. And reportedly, there was a greater number than usual of that happening this year. The number of staffers and election observers plays a role, but mostly, Kimsey says his staff is focused on accuracy over speed. So when you're looking at these numbers, we're still waiting on close to 70,000 votes from Clark County to be added to these counts of what you've seen right now. Now, I've reached out to Joe Kent's campaign each of the last 3 days, but they've stayed quiet since election night. Kent did post on Twitter earlier today saying we are still in this fight. On the other side, I talked with Marie Gluesenkamp Perez today. She praised the hard work of election workers, said she's still cautiously optimistic she'll keep her lead, and said it's just a waiting game.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly expect the results to get closer, but we're just looking to maintain an even keel here and wait patiently for the results.
Both Kent and Gluesenkamp Perez have told me they will accept the results of this election multiple times, no matter who wins. In talking with election officials about the number of remaining ballots, it looks like voter turnout for this race will be similar, if not slightly higher than it was in the 2018 midterms. And for some context on those Clark County ballots, the big outstanding elephant in the room last night when we got about 20,000 ballots from Clark County, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez actually extended her lead. So we'll see if it's the same tonight, Pat.
Okay, fascinating to watch. Thanks, Evan. There are still other races to be called, including that one at Washington. We'll continue to update election numbers on air and online. You can find the latest anytime at kgw.com and the KGW app. Now let's get to one of the more controversial measures that is projected to pass in Oregon, Measure 114. What you're seeing is what it looks like the results are right now. Here's a look at what you've been saying to us about this measure. John wrote in and said, does Measure 114 get illegal guns off the streets? Measure 114 only appears to make honest people who want to own guns more honest. How does licensing honest, responsible gun owners save more lives? Crooks, thieves, and gang members won't be applying for permits as they don't get their guns legally. I'm all for saving lives, he writes, but this just seems backwards. And we also got a voicemail from a man named Lyle.
Personally, I don't see how this is going to stop any mass shootings at all. It's going to cost the taxpayers of the state of Oregon thousands and thousands of dollars that aren't going to come from, that have nowhere to come from. And it's just going to create a big mess. It's not going to save any lives at all. That's my voice. Have a great evening. Thanks.
Okay, thanks to both of you for taking the time to let us know what you're thinking about this. For those of you who are not familiar, here's a quick breakdown of what Measure 114 is set to do. Anyone who wants to buy a gun in Oregon will have to get a permit first. Those will be issued by local law enforcement, but the process to do that is still a little bit unclear. What we do know is this: the steps to getting a permit include completing a gun safety class and submitting to a federal criminal background check, which will include getting your fingerprints taken. The permits could cost up to $65 and would be good for 5 years. And if you're denied, there is an appeal process. If you are approved, there's no limit to the number of guns you could buy. These permits would be required only to own not to own a gun, only to purchase a new one. So let me make sure I say that clearly. The permit is not required to own a gun, only to purchase a new one. That means that current legal gun owners do not need a permit, sorry about that, unless they want to buy another gun. The measure also bans ammunition magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, with the exception of people who already own these magazines. They can keep them. New ones just cannot be sold. Now, so far, there's not been any lawsuit or court action against the measure, but it's likely only a matter of time until that happens. And the votes from the election still need to be certified, so it is possible that's why nobody has filed suit just yet. But even if the courts are not involved yet, the controversy is just getting going. The sheriff of Linn County, Michelle Duncan, took to Facebook to tell her constituents how she feels about this measure. Here's an excerpt. Unfortunately, we are seeing the passage of ballot measure 114. This is a terrible law, she wrote, for gun owners, crime victims, and public safety. I want to send a clear message to Linn County residents that the Linn County Sheriff's Office is not going to be enforcing magazine capacity limits. She continues, although I am hopeful that the passing of this measure will result in an immediate lawsuit against it, as it should, there is still going to be a lot to sort out on how this will impact our residents, the Linn County Sheriff's Office, and other police agencies in Oregon. So right now, it's not entirely clear what Sheriff Duncan means when she says Linn County will not enforce magazine capacity limits. Again, if you have those magazines already, you can keep them. So will the sheriff simply allow gun shops in Linn County to continue to sell the high-capacity magazines? We don't know. That appears to be what she's referencing, but we were not able to get her on camera to talk about that today. It's also worth noting about 70% of voters in Linn County said no to Measure 114, and the vast majority of voters we spoke to near Albany support the sheriff.
Good for her. Tell me why. Because that 114 is the most bogus bill I've ever read.
So I agree. I voted for her, and I'm thankful that she feels that way. And I'm thankful to be a member of Linn County.
Linn County, by the way, is not the only one feeling this way. In Union County, the sheriff wrote that he also will not enforce the law when it's enacted. But since the sheriff's message has been making the rounds on social media, a few of you have written to us about this. One person with the name Job said, since when do sheriffs decide which laws should be enforced? It appears Linn County and the sheriff's office will decide what, if any, laws to follow. And Sid wrote in to ask, putting the potential court challenges aside, how can a sheriff decide what laws they will enforce? I noticed that over the last few years, several sheriffs across the country have made similar proclamations over a wide range of subjects. It appears to be capricious and outside the law as the average citizen perceives our system to work. Thanks to both of you for your input. So we talked to a Lewis and Clark law professor who says the legality of public officials not enforcing a law is kind of a gray area until the courts weigh in.
If the courts say, no, this is okay, this is good, then I think at that point, it's been settled and that no government official can still maintain the view, well, I still think it's unconstitutional.
So this thing certainly feels like it's rushing headlong toward a lawsuit. We did get a note from the Oregon Attorney General's office saying that the AG does expect local law enforcement to comply with the law, including enforcing it. So time will tell, but people on both sides of the 114 debate will be watching any potential lawsuits closely, and so will we, of course. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Let us know what you think about Measure 114. Send us an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. All right, let's tie up a couple election loose ends, updating you on a couple of folks that we reported on during the lead up to the election. Remember this? First up, James Heeb. Remember him? This is body camera footage from the sheriff's deputies called to the Clackamas County Fair on August 17th. That's State Representative James Heeb. Well, it's in the shirt that says Heeb. He said that he'd been drinking that night and refused to put out a cigarette at the fair. He was eventually arrested by the deputies, but later the district attorney decided not to press charges. Heeb is the person who replaced Christine Drazen when she stepped down from the legislature to run for governor. In the most political races, that arrest would be the end of a candidate's political future. They'd be done. They would drop out. They would either be pressured by their party to do it or they would do it on their own, but either way, they'd be gone. And I did hear rumors shortly after that arrest that he was going to drop out of the race and work on some personal issues. But guess what? Nope. He hung in there. And it looks like he is now on his way to re-election. According to the Secretary of State's office, Heeb has 16,126 votes. His Democratic challenger, Walt Trandum, has 8,605. I guess that goes to show it's true what they say, all politics is local. And the locals like James Heeb, despite that night at the county fair. The other loose end involves the Clackamas County Clerk, Sherry Hall. Here's a viewer question we got this week. Richard wants to know, any news on the results of the county clerk's election where the incumbent had a dubious history of bollocksing up past elections? We assume that Richard's referring to Hall, the clerk in Clackamas County. And yes, Richard, after 20 years, voters decided, hey man, enough's enough. Clackamas residents, you'll soon have a new clerk in charge of your elections. First elected in 2002 and re-elected 4 more times, Sherry Hall has now been ousted after numerous mistakes and scandals. Her challenger, Catherine McMullen, getting more than 65% of the vote there. Back in the May primary, you might recall, Hall made headlines when her office sent out ballots with blurry barcodes and then had to hand duplicate and recount those votes, which took weeks. They did ultimately finish before the certification deadline, though. We talked to McMullen yesterday. She says despite all the attention on the county clerk's election, albeit negative, her campaign still had to work hard to let people know what exactly a county clerk does and why the office is so important.
We worked really hard to address that. A lot of the work was towards tackling the undervote. And the undervote is when a voter doesn't choose any candidate in a contest. And looking at the results that came out last night, a little bit before 11 o'clock, our undervote for county clerk is actually lower than either the county commissioner positions.
McMullen says that when she takes office, she'll be focusing on improving voter services like voter registration, and she'll be officiating weddings again. That has not happened since same-sex marriage became legal, and the current clerk, Sherry Hall, decided she was not going to take part in that. So, what do you think about all this? Voters seem ready for a change, but did you think Sherry Hall deserved another shot? Let us know. Send an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.
Still ahead on the story, a Washington state body broker convicted of dumping human remains in the Arizona desert learns how long he'll spend behind bars.
I believe that his sentence should be strong enough to deter anybody in the body donation industry from trying to follow in his footsteps.
The sentence handed down by the judge and the chilling reality of what could happen after he's served his time when the story returns.
Before we get into this next story, a quick warning. It deals with some pretty graphic content. A former Washington State body broker recently learned his fate in court after being convicted of dumping the remains of people from the Pacific Northwest in the Arizona desert. Body brokers take human body donations and sell body parts for things like medical research. In this case, though, this man named Walter Mitchell shut down his body donation business in Seattle in 2020 when the pandemic hit. So then he packed a U-Haul with dry ice and body parts, but it's what happened when he arrived in Arizona that's going to cost him years in prison. Here's Chris Ingalls from our sister station, King, in Seattle.
Okay, we'll follow you guys, okay?
Outdoorsmen found 2 piles of bagged body parts in the Arizona desert in December of 2020. They called police.
Did you touch anything?
No, hell no. Medical labels on the bags led detectives to Mitchell, who was charged with 29 counts of abandoning a dead body, one for each recovered body part.
Specifically right leg, no hip of Janice Gator. Specifically right arm with shoulder of Vivian Crabtree. Specifically right leg, no hip of unidentified male number 1. Specifically left arm, no shoulder of Amanda West. Specifically left foot of Amanda West.
In a Prescott, Arizona courtroom, the father of Amanda West, who died from cancer in Seattle in 2019, said she donated her body as one last act for humankind.
Mr. Mitchell took her final wish and threw it out, threw her remains out that were supposed to be used for good.
Mitchell spent decades in the largely unregulated whole body donation industry, in which brokers accept donated bodies and sell them for a profit to medical and scientific institutions.
I believe that his sentence should be strong enough to deter anybody in the body donation industry from trying to follow in his footsteps.
The prosecutor requested an 18-year prison sentence just before Mitchell offered an apology to the victims' families.
Today, family coming up, that hurts. That hurt me. And I take responsibility for what I did.
The judge handed down a sentence of 6 years, 3 months in prison.
At this time, defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff.
The judge, by the way, gave Mitchell credit for time he's already served behind bars. That means he'll spend about 4 more years in prison. But get this, the body donation industry does not have regulation or licensing. So that means Mitchell could go right back to the body business as soon as he gets out. How about that? Stay with us. We're back right after this. The KGW Great Toy Drive is officially underway. One of the best ways you can help is to give online. You can go to kgw.com/toy and click Donate Cash. If you make a cash donation online, we'll do the shopping for you. Your donations support local toy stores and over 150 nonprofits. We want to thank Fred Meyer, IQ Credit Union, Ziply, Fiber, and local Toyota dealers for everything they're doing to make this year's toy drive such a great success. All right, keep sending your thoughts and questions. We'll finish the show right after this. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching and being here, being part of our family. Remember the story, our story? Well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow night.